The Ghost in the Machine. In the shimmering glass towers of Silicon Valley, the narrative is always the same. Artificial intelligence is a miracle of pure mathematics. When you ask ChatGPT to write a poem or summarize a meeting, it feels like magic. We are told that these models are the result of unsupervised learning, where vast neural networks process the entire sum of human knowledge at the speed of light. It's clean, it's autonomous, and it's supposedly just code. But if you look closer at the architecture of this magic, you will find something deeply unsettling. Behind every helpful AI response and every safe image generation, there is a hidden army of human beings living in the shadows of the global economy. This is the ghost economy, and it is the only reason the AI revolution hasn't collapsed under the weight of its own toxicity. Meet Moffat. He doesn't live in California. He lives in a cramped apartment in Nairobi, Kenya, a city the government aggressively markets as the Silicon Savannah, a hub for global tech outsourcing. Every morning, Moffat logs into a platform that looks like a basic spreadsheet. His job title is Data Labeler, but that name is a sanitized lie. In reality, Moffat is a digital janitor. For 9 hours a day, Moffat is forced to watch the darkest corners of the internet so that you don't have to. He views thousands of snippets of graphic violence, hate speech, and unspeakable cruelty, material pulled from the darkest recesses of the web. His task is to label them, to tell the machine, this is bad, this is forbidden, do not show this to the user. For this service, the psychological protection of the Western world, Moffat and his colleagues were paid a starting wage of exactly $1.32 per hour. The technical term for this hidden system is reinforcement learning from human feedback, RLHF. Companies like OpenAI, Meta, and Google don't just teach AI. They filter it through the collective trauma of millions of workers in Kenya, the Philippines, and India. RLHF is the verification tax, a structural operational requirement that the industry tried to convince us was just a temporary phase. But the data shows the opposite. As AI systems grow more capable, the demand for human verification actually grows rather than shrinks. The mystery begins with a company called Sama. Based in San Francisco, but operating largely in East Africa, Sama branded itself as an ethical outsourcing firm that lifted people out of poverty. In November 2021, Sama signed a secret contract with OpenAI. The goal? To make ChatGPT safe before its world-shaking launch. OpenAI sent tens of thousands of text snippets to Nairobi. Much of this text described child sexual abuse, bestiality, murder, suicide, and torture in graphic, harrowing detail. The workers were expected to read and label between 150 to 250 snippets per shift. One worker who read a graphic description of an unspeakable crime involving a child told investigators that the experience was torture. He suffered from recurring visions and mental disturbance that lasted long after the workday ended. "I consider myself a soldier," one moderator named Okinyi said. "Soldiers take bullets for the good of the people, but these bullet wounds stay forever." This is the automation paradox. While the marketing departments in the U.S. sell a vision of a world without labor, the engineers are building a system that is more dependent on low-cost human effort than anything we've seen since the Industrial Revolution. We like to think of AI as a tireless librarian who never sleeps. But we now know that this librarian stands on the shoulders of exhausted, underpaid, and sometimes broken human beings who are carrying the emotional weight of the Internet's garbage. The scale of this operation is massive. The data labeling industry is expected to grow to over $14 billion by 2030. Yet, the workers who power this $14 billion engine are trapped in digital sweatshops. In the Philippines, workers for companies like Scale AI operate in dingy internet cafes or jam-packed office spaces, differentiating pedestrians from palm trees for self-driving cars for wages that are often withheld without explanation. Why is this labor hidden? Because the illusion of pure AI is more profitable than the reality of human-powered software.
If the public realized that every safe answer from an AI required a person in Kenya to read a description of torture for $1.50 an hour, the magic would vanish. We have built a system of strategic invisibility, where the people who make the system smart are systematically excluded from the narrative of progress. But the silence is starting to break.
In early 2023, the first major lawsuits were filed in Kenya against Meta and Sama, alleging human trafficking, union busting, and harrowing working conditions that left workers with PTSD and drug dependency. What happens to a human brain when it is forced to act as a shield for an algorithm? And what happens to the AI itself when the human signal it relies on begins to degrade from pure exhaustion? To find the answer, we have to look inside the offices of the Silicon Savannah and uncover the secret industrial discipline practices used to keep the ghost workers silent. The digital panopticon and the entropy of the soul. To the architects of AI in San Francisco, the data labeling process is often viewed as a simple utility, like electricity or water. But for the people in the Silicon Savannah of Nairobi, or the digital sweatshops of the Philippines, the reality is closer to a high-tech prison. The magic of AI is built on a foundation of algorithmic management, a hidden system of discipline where every second of a worker's life is measured, audited, and potentially penalized by the very code they are trying to train. Inside the offices of outsourcing firms like Sama and Cloud Factory, the atmosphere is one of intense, suffocating pressure. Imagine sitting in front of a screen where a timer is constantly counting down. For content moderators in Colombia and Kenya, the targets are often unmanageable. They are expected to process between 700 and 1,000 cases per shift. Mathematically, this means a human being has approximately 7 to 12 seconds to look at an image, often graphic or disturbing, and make a life or death decision for that content. This is not a creative process, it is industrialized reflex. If a worker falls behind, they don't just get a warning. They lose their bonuses or are placed on a performance improvement plan, PIP, which is frequently just a slow-motion firing. The control is so absolute that workers have reported being forbidden from leaving their seats even for basic biological needs like using the bathroom during production hours. They are forced to use their well-being breaks, supposedly meant for psychological recovery, just to perform basic human functions. But the true cost of this system isn't measured in seconds. It's measured in psychological scarring. The content these ghost workers filter is the concentrated darkness of the human experience. Child sexual abuse, animal torture, beheadings, and suicide. One moderator described his work for OpenAI as torture, explaining that after reading graphic descriptions of violence, he suffered from recurring visions that haunted him long after he logged off. The medical toll is staggering. Researchers have recorded widespread cases of PTSD, depression, and chronic anxiety among AI trainers. Some workers report physical symptoms like sudden weight loss and insomnia. One Kenyan moderator, Lynette, confessed that the continuous exposure to sexual violence changed her behavior and ultimately led to the collapse of her personal relationships. She felt like a different person, a hollowed-out version of herself, sacrificed so that your chatbot could remain polite. To keep this hidden, the industry relies on the architecture of silence. Workers are often forced to sign aggressive non-disclosure agreements, NDAs, that act as legal gags. These NDAs prevent them from discussing their trauma with therapists, reporting labor violations, or even telling their families what they do for a living. In some offices, digital equipment and smartphones are strictly banned on the operation floor to ensure that no one can record the verbal abuse from supervisors or the horrific content on the screens. When workers try to organize or voice complaints, they face immediate retaliation or dismissal. This leads us to a terrifying technical mystery. What happens to the AI when its teachers are broken? In the field of computer science, there is a phenomenon known as model collapse. AI models are stochastic parrots. They learn by imitating patterns in data. If the humans providing that signal are exhausted, traumatized, and rushing through cases in 10 seconds just to keep their jobs, the quality of that signal begins to rot. When an AI is trained on garbage data produced by humans in a state of cognitive debt, the model begins to narrow its output distribution and eventually suffers a catastrophic failure of quality. By treating human labor as a disposable resource, tech companies are inadvertently building an entropy spiral. They are feeding their billion-dollar models with the output of broken minds, creating a recursive loop where AI becomes less intelligent and more hallucinatory over time. We are building a shining city of intelligence on a foundation of digital waste, and the walls are starting to crack. Why would the most powerful corporations on Earth risk their core product by exploiting the very people who make it work? The answer lies in the macroeconomics of invisibility. If the public realized that AI isn't a tireless robot, but a system powered by millions of traumatized humans earning $1.23 an hour, the valuation of the entire tech sector would collapse. But a rebellion is brewing in the Silicon Savannah. Ghost workers are starting to speak out, filing landmark lawsuits and forming the Data Labelers Association to demand a living tariff and psychological protection. How do we break the cycle of scroll, click, suffer? And what is the premium section of reality that we must reclaim to save both ourselves and our technology? To find the answer, we must look at the final strategy of resistance and the movement to bring the ghosts out of the code and back into the light of human rights. The global auction of desperation and the dawn of resistance. If the Silicon Savannah of Nairobi is a high-tech prison, then platforms like Remotasks and Scale AI are the auction houses of the 21st century. To understand the final layer of this hidden system, you have to understand a concept called the race to the bottom. In a traditional economy, if you want a skilled worker, you compete by offering better wages. But in the ghost work economy, the algorithm has inverted this logic. Platforms like Remotasks auction off microtasks to a global pool of millions. If a worker in Kenya demands $1.50 an hour, the system simply shifts the task to a worker in the Philippines or a refugee camp in Lebanon who is desperate enough to do it for $1.10. This is vicious competition by design. Outsourcing firms have created a non-specified set of rules where they reserve the right to withhold payment or deactivate accounts for work they subjectively deem inaccurate, often after the work has already been completed. Workers, known as taskers, report that payments are frequently delayed, reduced, or canceled without explanation. In the Philippines, some earn as little as $6 a day, far below the local minimum wage. We are witnessing the birth of a global underclass, a digital peasantry that builds the luxury of the West while living in a state of permanent financial insecurity. But the industry's greatest trick is the illusion of progress. Companies like Savannah often brand themselves as impact sourcing firms, claiming they lift people out of poverty. But as the 2026 GIZ report, Invisible Workers, Visible Harms, points out, there is a massive gap between a minimum wage and a living tariff. In Kenya, while many data labelers technically meet the legal minimum wage, the living tariff, the amount needed to actually survive, pay for health care, and recover from the trauma of the work, is nearly double what they receive. This financial gap creates a trap of perpetual subscription. Workers like Edwin, who has spent 9 years in the digital mines, find that the skills they acquire, looping pedestrian outlines for self-driving cars or identifying hate speech, are not transferable to any other sector. They are being trained for a world that only exists inside the AI's black box. They cannot leave, and they cannot progress. They are simply fuel for the machine. However, the silence is finally breaking. The ghosts are beginning to haunt their masters. In early 2023, a landmark movement began in Nairobi. Workers from Meta, TikTok, and OpenAI did the one thing the algorithm told them was impossible. They organized. They formed the Data Labelers Association, led by people like Joan and Moffat, to demand transparency, psychological support, and fair contracts. They filed lawsuits against Meta and Sama, alleging harrowing conditions and union-busting tactics. The industry's response was predictable. OpenAI declined to comment, and Meta claimed they found no evidence to support the claims of trauma. But the evidence is written on the brains of the workers. When a moderator like Lynette says, "I feel like a different person now," she is describing a structural theft of the soul. This brings us to the ultimate conclusion of our investigation. The ghost economy is not a glitch in the system. It is the system's core architecture. AI feels intelligent only because we have outsourced the inconvenience of caring to people we have agreed to ignore. We have built a city of light in California that is powered by the dark matter of Nairobi. So, what is the strategy for the year 2026? How do we practice polite audacity in the face of the ghost machine? It starts with noticing. Every time you use an AI tool, you must realize that you are interacting with a human artifact. Behind the text is a person who read a description of torture for your safety. Behind the image is a person who spent 12 hours in a dark room for your convenience. We must demand digital sovereignty, not just for ourselves, but for those who build our future. We must support the call for human-in-the-loop systems that prioritize worker welfare over algorithmic speed. We must ask the big tech corporations the uncomfortable question: did the people who trained this data give their consent to be traumatized? The era of strategic invisibility is over. The Silicon Savannah is no longer a secret. Your heart has a budget of 3 billion beats. But so does the heart of the worker in Nairobi. Don't let their time be erased to fuel a billionaire's valuation. In a world of dead internet and synthetic ghosts, the most revolutionary act you can perform is to see the human. Because the only thing more powerful than an algorithm is a human being who refuses to be invisible. The machine is listening, but the people are speaking.